In a world where success is measured by speed, technology, and shortcuts, there lived a man whose neighbors called him foolish. They whispered behind his back, rolled their eyes at his old-fashioned methods, and predicted his inevitable failure. What they didn't know was that this weathered farmer possessed something far more valuable than their modern machinery and clever business plans. Hidden beneath his humble appearance and simple ways lay a secret that would soon transform not just his own destiny, but the lives of his 3 sons forever. The same people who mocked his patient approach and traditional values would soon witness something extraordinary, a demonstration of power, precision, and planning so masterful that it would leave them speechless. This is the true story of how underestimation became the greatest weapon in the hands of those who knew how to wield it. Sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest truths, and sometimes, those who appear weakest strike with the most devastating precision. The laughter was about to stop. The reckoning was about to begin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered farmhouse as Samuel Harrison stepped onto his front porch, coffee mug in hand. At 72 years old, his back bore the permanent curve of decades spent working the soil, and his hands told stories of countless seasons through their deep lines and permanent stains. The neighboring farms had long since been sold to developers or transformed into mechanized operations run by corporations, but Samuel's 100-acre plot remained stubbornly unchanged, a living museum in a world racing toward an uncertain future. His neighbors in the rapidly growing suburb of Millfield viewed him as an anachronism. The Henderson family next door often complained about the rooster that crowed at dawn, disrupting their carefully climate-controlled morning routines. Margaret Peterson, who lived in the sprawling house to the south, frequently voiced her concerns at town meetings about property values and the unsightly appearance of working farmland among their manicured developments. Even his own sons seemed embarrassed by their father's refusal to modernize or sell. Samuel had 3 sons, each as different from one another as spring rain from winter snow. Michael, the eldest at 45, worked as a corporate lawyer in the city, driving his luxury sedan past the family farm twice a week on his way to visit clients in the neighboring county. He would slow down as he passed, shaking his head at the sight of his father still using a 30-year-old tractor when he could afford to buy 10 modern ones. Michael had offered repeatedly to help his father retire with dignity, which usually meant selling the land to developers and moving to a comfortable retirement community. David, the middle son at 42, ran a successful construction company that specialized in building the very suburban developments that now surrounded the farm. He understood land value better than anyone and frequently calculated the millions his father could earn by selling to the right developer. David's frustration with his father's stubbornness had grown over the years, especially as his own business could benefit from the connections and capital that such a sale would bring. James, the youngest at 39, had taken a different path entirely. After earning an MBA from a prestigious university, he had started a tech consulting firm that helped traditional businesses modernize their operations. He looked at his father's farm and saw nothing but inefficiency and wasted potential. James had prepared detailed presentations showing how modern farming techniques, automated systems, and strategic partnerships could transform the property into a profitable venture, but Samuel would listen politely and, then, return to his old methods without comment. The 3 brothers had grown up on this farm, learning the value of hard work and perseverance, but they had also learned to see their father's dedication to traditional farming as a limitation rather than a strength. They loved him, but they pitied him too. In their eyes, Samuel Harrison was a good man trapped in an outdated mindset, too stubborn or too proud to accept the reality of the modern world. What none of them understood was that Samuel's apparent resistance to change wasn't born of stubbornness or ignorance. Every decision he made, every tradition he maintained, and every modern convenience he rejected was part of a carefully crafted plan that had been decades in the making. While his neighbors and even his own son saw an old man clinging to the past, Samuel was actually preparing for a future that none of them could imagine. The farm itself told a story that few bothered to read. The old barn, which neighbors considered an eyesore, had been reinforced and modernized in ways that weren't visible from the road. The seemingly random arrangement of fields and crop rotations followed a pattern that would become clear only to those who understood the larger strategy. Even the decision to maintain older equipment and traditional methods served purposes that extended far beyond simple nostalgia or financial constraint. Samuel's daily routine appeared simple to outside observers. He woke before dawn, tended to his animals, worked his fields, maintained his equipment, and ended each day on his front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that changed with the seasons. But, within this routine lay complexities and preparations that would have impressed even his MBA-educated youngest son, if only James had possessed the patience to look beyond surface appearances. The old farmer had learned long ago that the greatest strength often came from being underestimated. While his neighbors assumed he was too set in his ways to understand modern business, Samuel had quietly been studying market trends, commodity futures, and development patterns with the dedication of a scholar. While they thought he was too old to adapt to new technologies, he had been implementing innovations in ways that preserved the appearance of traditional farming while dramatically improving efficiency and profitability. Most importantly, while everyone assumed that Samuel's 3 sons had rejected their agricultural heritage in favor of more modern careers, the truth was far different. Each son had chosen his profession as part of a larger family strategy that Samuel had encouraged and guided from the beginning. Michael's legal expertise, David's construction knowledge, and James's business acumen weren't departures from the family's agricultural legacy, they were essential components of a master plan that had been 20 years in the making. The community's perception of the Harrison family as a collection of successful sons embarrassed by their backward father couldn't have been further from the truth. In reality, Samuel had orchestrated his sons' career choices as carefully as a conductor arranges a symphony, ensuring that when the time came to execute his long-term strategy, each son would possess exactly the skills and connections needed to succeed. But, the most remarkable aspect of Samuel's planning wasn't what he had prepared his sons to do, it was how he had prepared them to think. Despite their apparent frustration with his traditional methods, each son had internalized lessons about patience, precision, and long-term thinking that would prove invaluable when the truth finally emerged. They had learned to value substance over appearance, results over recognition, and strategic thinking over quick gains, even if they didn't yet understand how these lessons would be applied. As Samuel stood on his porch that morning, sipping his coffee and watching the sun climb higher into the sky, he wasn't thinking about the neighbors who considered him a relic or the sons who thought he was wasting his potential. He was thinking about timing. After 20 years of careful preparation, the moment he had been working toward was finally approaching. The pieces were all in place, the market conditions were optimal, and his sons had developed the skills and connections necessary to execute a plan that would surprise everyone who thought they understood Samuel Harrison and his old-fashioned farm. The laughter that echoed across Millfield whenever Samuel's name came up in conversation was about to give way to something entirely different. The old farmer who had been dismissed as a stubborn relic was about to demonstrate that sometimes the most effective strategies are those that remain invisible until the moment they're executed with devastating precision. Samuel finished his coffee, set the mug on the porch railing, and walked toward his barn. There was work to do, and time was running short. The plan that had been 20 years in the making was about to begin its final phase, and the sons who thought they knew their father were about to discover just how much they still had to learn. The call came on a Thursday evening in late September, just as the autumn air was beginning to carry the crisp promise of winter. Michael was in his downtown office, reviewing contracts by the light of his desk lamp, when his phone buzzed with his father's number. Samuel rarely called unless there was an emergency, so Michael answered immediately, expecting to hear about a health crisis or farm accident. Instead, Samuel's voice was calm and measured. "Son, I need you and your brothers to come to the farm this Saturday morning. There's something important we need to discuss." Michael glanced at his calendar, mentally rearranging his weekend plans. "Is everything all right, Dad? You sound serious." "Everything's fine," Samuel replied. "Better than fine, actually. But this conversation needs to happen in person, and it needs to happen with all 3 of you together." Similar calls went out to David and James that evening, each brother receiving the same mysterious summons. David assumed it was finally time for the conversation about selling the farm that they had all been expecting. James wondered if their father had finally decided to explore some of the modernization proposals he had been presenting for years. None of them suspected that Saturday morning would mark the beginning of the most extraordinary education of their lives. Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect fall weather that made people remember why they loved living in the countryside. The 3 brothers arrived at the farm within minutes of each other, their expensive cars looking oddly out of place parked next to Samuel's weathered pickup truck. They found their father waiting in the farmhouse kitchen, 3 thick folders stacked neatly on the old wooden table that had served as the family's gathering place for over 40 years. "Coffee's fresh," Samuel said, gesturing toward the pot. "Sit down, boys. We've got a lot to cover." The brothers exchanged glances as they settled into chairs that still bore the scuff marks from their childhood years. The folders on the table were labeled with their names in Samuel's careful handwriting, and the thickness of the documents inside suggested something far more complex than a simple family meeting. Samuel opened his own folder and pulled out a photograph that he placed in the center of the table. It showed the farm as it had appeared 25 years earlier, when the boys were still in school and the surrounding area was mostly rural. The image revealed details that none of them had paid attention to at the time: the precise positioning of buildings, the careful arrangement of fields, and the strategic placement of access roads that seemed to serve no obvious purpose. 25 years ago, Samuel began, I made a decision that probably looked foolish to a lot of people. I chose to keep farming when everyone else was selling to developers. I chose to use old methods when new technology was available. I chose to appear backward and stubborn when I could have appeared modern and progressive. He pulled out a second photograph, this one showing the current state of the farm surrounded by suburban development. But I didn't make that choice because I was afraid of change or too set in my ways to adapt. I made it because I could see something that nobody else was paying attention to. Samuel spread a map across the table, pointing to various markings and annotations. This region was always going to experience massive growth. The interstate expansion that was approved 15 years ago, the university extension that opened 10 years ago, and the tech corridor development that started 5 years ago, none of these were coincidences or surprises. They were all part of a planned development pattern that anyone could have researched if they had taken the time. Michael leaned forward, studying the map with a lawyer's attention to detail. "You knew about all this development before it happened?" "Not just knew about it," Samuel replied. "I helped shape it." He pulled out a series of documents from his folder, spreading them across the table like a poker player revealing a winning hand. The brothers found themselves looking at correspondence with city planners, meeting notes with developers, consultation agreements with engineering firms, and investment records that painted a picture of their father they had never imagined. "For the past 20 years, Samuel continued, I've been serving on the Regional Development Committee, the Zoning Review Board, and the Transportation Planning Commission. I've consulted on every major development project within 50 miles of this farm. I've provided input on road placement, utility routing, and environmental impact assessments. And, through it all, I've been ensuring that this property would end up in exactly the position it's in today." David, who had spent his career in construction and development, stared at the documents with growing amazement. "Dad, some of these projects, my company bid on these jobs. I never knew you were involved in the planning stages." "That was intentional," Samuel said with a slight smile. "I needed you to develop your expertise and build your reputation independently. If people had known you were my son, they might have assumed your success was due to inside information rather than your own abilities." James picked up a thick financial report that detailed commodity futures, land valuations, and market projections going back 15 years. The complexity and sophistication of the analysis rivaled anything produced by his own consulting firm. "You've been tracking all of this? The market trends, the development patterns, the economic indicators?" "Every week for 20 years, Samuel confirmed. "I may look like an old farmer who doesn't understand modern business, but I've been studying these markets with the same dedication I put into studying soil conditions and weather patterns. The difference is that I kept my research private." The brothers spent the next 2 hours reviewing document after document, each revelation reshaping their understanding of their father and his seemingly simple life. They discovered that Samuel owned several small parcels of land throughout the region, all purchased at strategic locations years before development arrived. They learned that he had been quietly investing in local businesses and development projects, building a portfolio that had grown substantially over the decades. Most remarkably, they found evidence that Samuel had been orchestrating their own career development with the same strategic precision he had applied to everything else. Michael's law firm had been chosen partly because of its expertise in agricultural and development law. David's construction company had been encouraged to specialize in exactly the types of projects that would be needed for the plan Samuel was developing. James's business education and consulting experience had been guided towards skills that would prove essential for managing complex, multifaceted ventures. "You've been planning this for our entire adult lives," Michael said, the implications still sinking in. "Every piece of advice you gave us, every opportunity you encouraged us to pursue, every connection you helped us make, it was all part of this larger strategy." Samuel nodded. "I learned a long time ago that real success doesn't come from quick decisions or sudden opportunities. It comes from patient planning, careful preparation, and precise execution. I also learned that the best strategies are the ones that nobody sees coming." He pulled out one final document, a comprehensive development proposal that took the brothers' breath away. The plan outlined the transformation of the family farm into the centerpiece of a massive mixed-use development that would include residential housing, commercial space, recreational facilities, and agricultural preservation areas. The proposal detailed how the existing farm infrastructure could be incorporated into the development, how the natural features of the land could be preserved and enhanced, and how the project could serve as a model for sustainable development in rapidly growing regions. "This isn't just about money," Samuel explained, though the financial projections in the document showed potential profits that exceeded anything the brothers had imagined possible. "It's about creating something meaningful and lasting. It's about proving that traditional values and modern innovation can work together. It's about building a legacy that honors where we came from while embracing where we're going." The development plan was extraordinary not just for its scope and potential profitability, but for the way it had been designed to utilize each son's specific expertise. Michael's legal knowledge would be essential for navigating the complex regulatory requirements. David's construction experience would be crucial for executing the building phases. James's business skills would be vital for managing the marketing, financing, and operational aspects of the project. "But why now?" David asked. "Why are you showing us this today?" Samuel smiled, and, for the first time, his son saw not the weathered face of an aging farmer, but the confident expression of a master strategist who had been waiting decades to reveal his hand. "Because yesterday, the state approved the final phase of the interstate expansion project. Next month, the university will announce its new technology research center. And, in 6 months, the largest development firm in the region will begin looking for the perfect location for their flagship mixed-use project." He pointed to a notation on the map that none of them had noticed before. "They're going to be looking for a property that has exactly the characteristics of this farm. A property with the right size, the right location, the right infrastructure, and the right zoning approvals. A property owned by people who understand both development and agriculture, who have the expertise to make the project successful, and who have the credibility to attract the kind of investors and partners needed for a venture of this magnitude." The brothers sat in stunned silence as the full scope of their father's planning became clear. For 20 years, while they had been building their careers and living their lives, Samuel had been orchestrating a complex strategy that positioned them perfectly for an opportunity that was still 6 months away from presenting itself. "The people who laughed at the old farmer," Samuel said quietly, "are about to discover that sometimes patience is the most powerful weapon of all. And, my sons, who thought their father was too stubborn to change, are about to learn that the greatest changes often begin with the courage to appear unchanged." The weeks following that Saturday morning revelation transformed the Harrison family's understanding of everything they thought they knew about success, strategy, and their own father. Samuel had given each son a specific assignment, tasks that would begin preparing them for the complex negotiations and decisions that lay ahead. But, more importantly, he had begun teaching them lessons about the art of invisible preparation that would reshape how they approached every aspect of their professional and personal lives. Michael's assignment was to research every major development project that had taken place in similar regions over the past decade, analyzing not just the financial outcomes but the legal strategies that had made success possible. As he dove into this research, he discovered patterns and approaches that had never occurred to him during his years of practicing corporate law. He found that the most successful development projects weren't necessarily those with the largest initial investments or the most aggressive timelines, but those that had anticipated and prepared for every possible legal challenge and regulatory requirement. Working late in his downtown office 3 weeks after the family meeting, Michael came across a case study that made him stop and stare at his computer screen. A development project in North Carolina had succeeded spectacularly by using exactly the approach his father was proposing, maintaining agricultural operations while gradually introducing complementary development, creating a model that satisfied both environmental concerns and economic growth objectives. The legal framework for that project had been developed over a period of 8 years, with each phase carefully planned to meet regulatory requirements while building community support. The lawyer who had orchestrated that legal strategy was quoted in the article as saying, "The key to success in complex development projects isn't speed or aggression, it's patience and preparation. You have to be willing to play a longer game than your competitors, and you have to be willing to appear inactive while you're actually building the foundation for something extraordinary." Michael realized that his father had been implementing exactly this strategy for 20 years. While neighbors and family members saw only an old farmer stubbornly clinging to outdated methods, Samuel had been building legal, financial, and political foundations that would prove unshakable when the time came to execute his plan. Meanwhile, David was conducting his own research into the construction and development aspects of the project. His assignment was to analyze the infrastructure requirements for a mixed-use development of the size and complexity his father was proposing. What he discovered surprised him even more than the legal research had surprised Michael. The old barn that neighbors considered an eyesore had been systematically upgraded over the years with structural reinforcements that would make it perfect for conversion into a community center or event space. The seemingly random placement of wells and utilities around the property actually created an ideal foundation for the utility grid a major development would require. Even the access roads that Samuel had built over the years, ostensibly for farm equipment, followed routes that would prove optimal for the traffic flow patterns a large development would generate. "He's been building this infrastructure for decades," David told his wife one evening as he spread blueprints and site surveys across their kitchen table. "Every improvement he's made to the farm, every structure he's built or modified, every road he's graded, it all serves a dual purpose. It functions for farming operations now, but it's also perfectly designed to support the development he's been planning." David's construction experience allowed him to appreciate the sophistication of his father's approach in ways that others might miss. He understood that retrofitting an existing property for major development was usually far more expensive and time-consuming than starting from scratch. But Samuel had eliminated that disadvantage by designing every farm improvement with future development in mind. The old farmhouse itself was a masterpiece of strategic renovation. While it maintained its traditional appearance from the road, David discovered that it had been upgraded with modern electrical, plumbing, and communications systems that could easily support its conversion into administrative offices or residential units. The foundation had been reinforced, the roof had been engineered to support additional floors, and the floor plan had been modified in subtle ways that would facilitate future renovation. James's assignment involved analyzing the market conditions and developing financial projections for the development project. His research revealed the most remarkable aspect of his father's planning: the timing. Everything Samuel had done over the past 20 years had been calibrated to position the family for success at precisely this moment in the regional economy's development cycle. The interstate expansion would be completed within 18 months, dramatically improving access to the property. The university's technology center would create demand for exactly the type of mixed-use development Samuel was proposing. The regional population growth was accelerating at a rate that would make high-quality residential development extremely profitable. Even the agricultural aspects of the project were perfectly timed, as growing consumer interest in sustainable farming and local food production would make the preserved farming operations a valuable marketing asset rather than a constraint. "It's like he's been reading the market 20 years into the future," James told his business partner during a lunch meeting. "Every trend that's driving development demand today, he anticipated and positioned himself to benefit from. Population growth, transportation infrastructure, educational expansion, technology sector development, environmental awareness, he saw it all coming and prepared accordingly." But the financial projections James developed revealed something even more impressive than his father's market timing. The phased approach Samuel had designed would allow the development to be largely self-financing after the initial investment. Revenue from the first phase would fund the second phase, and so on, reducing the need for massive external financing while maintaining control over the project's direction and quality. As the three brothers shared their research findings over Sunday dinners at the farm, they began to understand that their father hadn't just created a business plan, he had crafted a masterpiece of strategic thinking that integrated legal, construction, financial, and market factors into a seamless whole. Every detail had been considered, every contingency had been planned for, and every advantage had been maximized. But, perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Samuel's strategy became clear during the fourth week of their research. Each brother discovered that their father had been subtly preparing them for this moment throughout their entire careers. The cases Michael had been encouraged to take, the projects David had been guided toward, the business relationships James had been helped to develop, all of it had been designed to give them the exact knowledge, experience, and connections they would need for this project. He's been training us, Michael realized during one of their Sunday discussions. Not just for our careers, but specifically for this project. Every major decision we've made, every opportunity we've pursued, every skill we've developed, he's been orchestrating all of it. The brothers found evidence of their father's subtle influence throughout their professional development. Michael discovered that several of his most important legal mentors had been quietly encouraged by Samuel to take an interest in his development. David learned that some of his most successful construction projects had come to him through connections his father had cultivated over the years. James found that his business school professors and early career advisors had all been people his father had met through his work on regional planning committees. It's not manipulation, Samuel explained when they confronted him about these discoveries. It's preparation. I couldn't give you the experience and knowledge you would need for this project, you had to earn it yourselves. But I could help ensure that you had opportunities to learn from the right people and work on the right projects. The three brothers were forced to confront the fact that their success hadn't been achieved independently of their father's influence, it had been achieved because of his patient, invisible guidance. He had been their mentor and strategist throughout their careers, providing direction and opportunities while allowing them to believe they were making their own choices and achieving their own success. This revelation was initially difficult for all three sons to accept. They had taken pride in their independent achievement and their ability to succeed in fields far removed from their agricultural heritage. Discovering that their father had been quietly orchestrating their development challenged their sense of autonomy and self-reliance. But, as they continued to analyze the scope and sophistication of Samuel's planning, their initial discomfort gave way to amazement and respect. They realized that their father's guidance hadn't diminished their achievements, it had made them possible. Without his strategic thinking and patient preparation, none of them would have been positioned to participate in the extraordinary opportunity he had created. He didn't just teach us to be successful, James observed during one of their research sessions. He taught us to be successful in exactly the ways that would allow us to work together on something bigger than any of us could achieve alone. The brothers began to understand that their father's greatest accomplishment wasn't the development project itself, it was the way he had shaped three very different individuals into a team perfectly suited to execute a complex, multifaceted strategy. He had taken their natural talents and interests and guided their development in ways that made them complementary rather than competitive, collaborative rather than independent. As the weeks passed and their understanding of their father's strategy deepened, the three brothers found themselves not just preparing for a business venture, but rediscovering their family identity. The man they had seen as a stubborn traditionalist revealed himself to be a visionary strategist whose thinking operated on a scale and timeline that humbled their own professional achievements. The laughter that had once followed mentions of the old farmer's backward ways was beginning to fade, replaced by growing curiosity about what Samuel Harrison was really planning. Neighbors who had dismissed him as a relic were starting to notice increased activity around the farm, frequent visits from his successful sons, and subtle changes that suggested something significant was developing. But the most important transformation was taking place within the Harrison family itself. Three sons who had spent years feeling embarrassed by their father's resistance to change were beginning to understand that real change often requires the patience to appear unchanged until the moment comes to reveal what has been building beneath the surface all along. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning in early December, exactly 6 months after Samuel had first revealed his master plan to his sons. James answered his phone to hear the voice of Richard Blackstone, CEO of Meridian Development Group, the largest and most prestigious development firm in the region. Meridian was known for creating landmark projects that redefined entire communities, luxury mixed-use developments that became destinations rather than merely places to live or work. "Mr. Harrison," Blackstone said, his voice carrying the confident authority of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted, "I understand your family owns the Harrison Farm property in Millfield. I'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss a potential acquisition that could be very profitable for all parties involved." James had been expecting this call, but hearing it still sent a surge of adrenaline through his system. After months of preparation and planning, the moment his father had anticipated for 20 years had finally arrived. "I appreciate your interest, Mr. Blackstone. Let me discuss this with my family and get back to you." "Of course," Blackstone replied. "But I should mention that time is somewhat of a factor. We're looking at several properties in the region, and we're hoping to make a decision within the next month." The right property owner could find themselves in a very advantageous position. The implied urgency was classic high-stakes negotiation tactics, designed to pressure the Harrison family into making a quick decision before they had time to fully consider their options or negotiate optimal terms. It was exactly the approach Samuel had predicted, and exactly the kind of pressure that destroyed most family farms when development opportunities arose. James scheduled the meeting for the following Friday, giving the family time to implement the strategy they had been refining for months. The meeting would take place at the farm itself, on Samuel's territory, where the old farmer would have every advantage that came from intimate knowledge of the land and complete preparation for the conversation that would unfold. The days leading up to the meeting were filled with final preparations. Michael reviewed every legal document one last time, ensuring that the family's position was unassailable and that they were prepared for any contractual complexities that might arise. David conducted a final inspection of the property, documenting every improvement and infrastructure element that would add value to any development project. James refined the financial projections and market analysis that would demonstrate the true worth of what the Harrison family was offering. But the most important preparations were the conversations between Samuel and his sons about negotiation strategy and family values. Samuel had spent decades learning to appear simple and unsophisticated while actually being extraordinarily well-informed and strategically sophisticated. He had taught his sons the same skills, showing them how to present information in ways that allowed others to underestimate their preparation while never actually concealing the truth. "The key," Samuel explained during their final strategy session on Thursday evening, "is to let them think they're educating us about our own property and our own options. Let them believe they're the experts and we're the simple farmers who don't understand the complexities of modern development. The more confident they become in their own superiority, the more likely they are to reveal information we can use and to underestimate the strength of our negotiating position." Friday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of December weather that made indoor meetings feel especially welcome. Samuel had arranged for the meeting to take place in the farm's kitchen, the same room where he had first revealed his master plan to his sons 3 months earlier. The setting was deliberately humble: worn wooden table, mismatched chairs, simple coffee cups, and the lingering smell of breakfast bacon. To visiting executives accustomed to polished conference rooms and catered meetings, the environment would seem almost quaint. Richard Blackstone arrived precisely on time, driving a luxury SUV that looked distinctly out of place next to Samuel's weathered pickup truck. He was accompanied by 2 associates, a development specialist and a financial analyst, both dressed in expensive suits that contrasted sharply with the casual attire worn by the Harrison family. The visual contrast was exactly what Samuel wanted, reinforcing the impression that this would be a straightforward negotiation between sophisticated developers and simple farmers. Samuel greeted the visitors with the kind of warm hospitality that had defined rural communities for generations, offering coffee and expressing genuine interest in their comfort. His manner was friendly and deferential, giving no hint of the strategic sophistication that lay beneath his simple demeanor. Michael, David, and James followed their father's lead, presenting themselves as successful professionals who nonetheless deferred to their father's judgment about family and farm matters. Blackstone began the meeting with a presentation about Meridian Development Group's history and achievements, clearly designed to impress the Harrison family with the company's success and establish their credibility as serious business partners. He described previous projects that had transformed rural properties into thriving communities, emphasizing the financial benefits that had accrued to the original property owners. The Harrison farm represents exactly the kind of opportunity we look for, Blackstone explained, spreading aerial photographs and preliminary site analyses across the kitchen table. The location is ideal, the size is perfect for our vision, and the existing infrastructure provides an excellent foundation for development. We're prepared to make an offer that would be extremely generous by current market standards. Samuel listened attentively, asking simple questions that seemed to demonstrate his lack of sophistication while actually gathering crucial information about Meridian's planning assumptions and financial constraints. "So you folks have done this kind of thing before?" he asked, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than strategic intelligence gathering. "Oh yes," Blackstone replied confidently, "dozens of times. We've learned what works and what doesn't. We know how to maximize value while minimizing complications. That's why we're prepared to handle all the complex aspects of this transaction ourselves, sparing you the difficulties of navigating the development process." The condescending tone was exactly what Samuel had expected, and exactly what would work to the family's advantage. Blackstone was so confident in his own expertise and so convinced of the Harrison family's naivety that he freely shared information about Meridian's development timeline, financial structure, and strategic objectives. Every detail he revealed strengthened the Harrison family's negotiating position. When Blackstone finally made his initial offer, a sum that was indeed generous by conventional standards but represented only a fraction of the property's true development value, Samuel responded with the kind of thoughtful consideration that suggested he was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the proposal. "That's certainly a lot of money," Samuel said slowly, "more than a farmer like me ever expected to see. But this land has been in our family for 3 generations. It's not just about money, it's about making sure we do right by the legacy we're leaving behind." The response was perfect, acknowledging the offer's attractiveness while introducing concerns that went beyond simple financial calculation. It positioned the family as motivated by values rather than just profit, making them seem more trustworthy while also suggesting they might be willing to accept less money in exchange for guarantees about how the land would be used. Blackstone leaned forward, sensing an opportunity to close the deal quickly. "Mr. Harrison, I completely understand your concerns about legacy and family values. That's exactly why Meridian is the right partner for your family. We don't just build developments, we create communities that honor the heritage of the land while providing for future generations." What Blackstone didn't realize was that his eagerness to reassure the family about legacy and values provided Samuel with the perfect opening to introduce the alternative proposal that had been months in the making. "Well," Samuel said, glancing at his sons as if seeking their approval for what he was about to suggest, "since you mentioned creating communities and honoring heritage, maybe you'd be interested in hearing about an idea my boys and I have been discussing. It might be different from what you're used to, but it could be exactly what you're talking about." Samuel's tone remained humble and deferential, but his sons recognized the signal they had been waiting for. The moment had come to reveal the strategy that would transform the negotiation from a simple acquisition discussion into something far more complex and profitable for the Harrison family. Michael opened the folder he had been keeping closed throughout the meeting, revealing the comprehensive development proposal that had been months in preparation. "Dad asked us to put together some thoughts about how the property might be developed in a way that preserves its agricultural character while still creating the kind of community you're describing." The documents Michael spread across the table were immediately recognizable to the Meridian team as the work of serious professionals. Detailed site plans, financial projections, legal frameworks, and market analyses filled page after page with the kind of sophisticated planning that rivaled anything Meridian's own team could produce. Blackstone's confident demeanor faltered slightly as he realized that the simple farmer and his sons had prepared a development proposal that was not only professionally executed but strategically superior to Meridian's initial concept. The Harrison family wasn't just selling land, they were proposing a partnership that would leverage their intimate knowledge of the property and community with Meridian's development expertise and financial resources. "This is quite impressive," Blackstone admitted, studying the documents with growing interest and concern. The proposal outlined a development approach that would be more profitable than Meridian's original plan while also addressing community concerns and regulatory requirements that Blackstone's team hadn't fully considered. Samuel smiled with the satisfaction of a master strategist whose patience and preparation were finally being rewarded. My sons tell me that sometimes the best developments are the ones that bring different kinds of expertise together. We know this land better than anyone, and you folks know development better than anyone. Seems like that could be a powerful combination. The meeting that Blackstone had expected to conclude with a simple purchase agreement had become something entirely different, the beginning of a complex negotiation between equals, where the Harrison family's strategic preparation and local knowledge would prove at least as valuable as Meridian's development expertise and financial resources. The silence in the farm kitchen stretched for nearly a full minute as Richard Blackstone and his associates absorbed the full implications of what the Harrison family had presented. What had begun as a routine acquisition meeting had transformed into something entirely unexpected, a sophisticated partnership proposal that demonstrated levels of planning and expertise that Blackstone had not anticipated from a rural farming family. David broke the silence by pulling out a detailed infrastructure analysis that mapped every utility line, access point, and structural element on the property. We've taken the liberty of having our construction team analyze the existing infrastructure, he said, his tone shifting from the deferential manner he had maintained earlier to the confident professionalism that had built his successful business. What we discovered is that this property is uniquely positioned for exactly the type of development Meridian specializes in. The analysis revealed that the seemingly random improvements Samuel had made over the years had created an infrastructure foundation that would save Meridian millions of dollars in development costs. The old farmer's patient work had eliminated the expensive and time-consuming infrastructure development that typically represented one of the largest obstacles to profitable development. The existing utilities can support a development 3 times the size of your original proposal, David continued, pointing to specific elements on the detailed site maps. The access roads are already graded and positioned for optimal traffic flow. The foundation work for major structures has essentially been completed through the existing farm buildings. What would typically require 18 months of infrastructure development has already been accomplished. James opened his financial analysis, revealing projections that made Blackstone's generous initial offer look almost insulting in comparison. Based on current market conditions and development trends, a project of the scope we're proposing would generate revenue streams that exceed your original projections by at least 300%, he explained. But, more importantly, the phased development approach we've outlined would allow the project to be largely self-financing after the initial investment. The financial strategy James had developed demonstrated that the Harrison family understood not just the property's value, but the complex economics of major development projects. Their proposal would reduce Meridian's financial risk while dramatically increasing potential profits, creating the kind of win-win scenario that experienced developers dreamed of finding. Blackstone found himself in the uncomfortable position of realizing that his carefully planned acquisition meeting had become a presentation by potential partners who were better prepared than his own team. The simple farmers he had expected to educate about development economics were instead educating him about opportunities he hadn't recognized and strategies he hadn't considered. Michael's legal analysis provided the final element that completed the Harrison family's strategic presentation. We've spent considerable time researching the regulatory environment for this type of development, he said, spreading documents that detailed zoning requirements, environmental assessments, and permit procedures. What we discovered is that the agricultural preservation components of our proposal would qualify for state and federal incentives that could offset up to 40% of the development costs. The legal framework Michael had developed wasn't just professionally competent, it was strategically brilliant. By incorporating agricultural preservation into the development plan, the Harrison family had created a project that would attract government support rather than regulatory resistance, transforming potential obstacles into financial advantages. The key insight, Michael continued, is that sustainable development projects that preserve agricultural heritage while accommodating growth are exactly what state and federal agencies want to support right now. Instead of fighting regulatory requirements, this approach uses them as a competitive advantage. Samuel had remained quiet during his son's presentations, allowing them to demonstrate the expertise they had developed over years of careful preparation. But, as the scope of the family's strategic thinking became clear, he finally spoke with the quiet confidence of someone whose long-term planning was being vindicated. Mr. Blackstone, 20 years ago I started thinking about what this property could become when the time was right, Samuel said, his manner no longer deferential but still respectful. I knew that development was coming to this region, and I knew that the families who prospered would be those who prepared rather than those who simply reacted to opportunities as they arose. Samuel pulled out a timeline that documented every decision he had made over the past 2 decades, showing how each improvement to the farm and each guidance decision for his sons had been part of a comprehensive strategy. Every building I've constructed, every infrastructure improvement I've made, every career choice I've encouraged my sons to pursue, it was all designed to position our family for this moment. The timeline was a masterpiece of strategic documentation that revealed the extraordinary sophistication of Samuel's thinking. Blackstone realized that he wasn't negotiating with a simple farmer who had stumbled into a valuable property, but with a strategic mastermind who had spent decades creating exactly the opportunity that Meridian was hoping to exploit. But the most important preparation, Samuel continued, was teaching my sons to value patience over speed, substance over appearance, and long-term thinking over short-term advantage. Those values are what allowed them to develop the expertise we're offering to share with Meridian today. The transformation in the negotiating dynamic was complete. What had begun as a potential acquisition had become a partnership discussion between equals, with the Harrison family offering resources and advantages that Meridian couldn't duplicate or obtain elsewhere. Blackstone's initial confidence had given way to genuine respect and strategic calculation. The Harrison family's proposal was superior to anything his team had developed, and their preparation eliminated risks and obstacles that would have made a conventional development approach far more expensive and time-consuming. "This is remarkable work," Blackstone admitted, studying the comprehensive proposal one final time. "You've created a development framework that addresses every major challenge we would typically face while maximizing both profitability and community benefit. I have to ask, why partner with Meridian at all? You clearly have the expertise to execute this project independently." Samuel smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose strategic thinking had anticipated this exact question. "Because we know our limitations as well as our strengths. We understand this property and this community better than anyone, but we don't have the development experience and financial resources that Meridian brings to projects like this. The right partnership allows each party to contribute what they do best while sharing in success that none of us could achieve alone." The negotiation that followed was unlike anything Blackstone had experienced in 20 years of development work. Instead of the typical adversarial dynamic where developers attempted to minimize land costs while landowners tried to maximize sale prices, the Harrison family had created a collaborative framework where both parties' success depended on the project's overall profitability. The final partnership agreement, negotiated over the following month, established the Harrison family as equal partners in a development venture that would transform their 100-acre farm into a landmark community. Samuel would serve as heritage consultant, ensuring that the project honored the agricultural character of the land. Michael would handle all legal aspects of the development process. David would manage the construction phases, utilizing his local knowledge and existing contractor relationships. James would oversee marketing and financial management, applying his business expertise to maximize the project's success. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the final agreement was the profit-sharing structure that reflected the true value of what each party contributed. Instead of a simple land sale that would have netted the Harrison family a one-time payment, the partnership arrangement would generate ongoing income that could support the family for generations while creating a model for sustainable development that other communities could emulate. The announcement of the Harrison-Meridian partnership sent shockwaves through Millfield and the surrounding region. Neighbors who had spent years viewing Samuel as an anachronistic figure clinging to outdated farming methods suddenly realized they had been living next to a strategic genius whose patient planning had created one of the most significant development opportunities in the region's history. Margaret Peterson, who had frequently complained about the unsightly farm reducing her property values, watched in amazement as those same property values began climbing dramatically due to proximity to what was being planned as the region's premier mixed-use community. The Henderson family, who had been annoyed by Samuel's rooster, found themselves fielding calls from real estate agents eager to help them capitalize on their location adjacent to what newspapers were calling the development project of the decade. The three Harrison sons, who had spent years feeling embarrassed by their father's stubborn traditionalism, found themselves being celebrated as examples of how traditional values and modern business expertise could combine to create extraordinary success. Michael was invited to speak at legal conferences about innovative approaches to development law. David received inquiries from developers throughout the region who wanted to learn from his community-focused construction strategies. James was featured in business magazines as an example of how local knowledge could be combined with sophisticated financial planning to create unique opportunities. But the most profound transformation was in the relationship between Samuel and his sons. The revelation of their father's strategic sophistication had forced all three men to reconsider not just their understanding of success and planning, but their appreciation for the values that had shaped their upbringing. They realized that the patience, persistence, and long-term thinking that had sometimes frustrated them during their youth were exactly the qualities that had made their current success possible. Samuel Harrison, the man who had been dismissed as a stubborn farmer refusing to adapt to the modern world, had demonstrated that true innovation often requires the courage to appear traditional while secretly preparing for a future that others cannot imagine. His 20-year strategy had vindicated every choice that had seemed backward or stubborn, revealing them instead as elements of a master plan that few people possessed the vision and patience to conceive or execute. The laughter that had once followed mentions of the old farmer's traditional methods was replaced by respectful recognition of strategic brilliance. The neighbors who had pitted Samuel's sons for having such an old-fashioned father now envied them for having been guided by someone whose thinking operated on a scale and timeline that humbled conventional business planning. As construction began on what would become Harrison Heritage Community, Samuel often stood on his front porch in the early morning hours, watching the sunrise paint the sky above land that would soon be transformed into something magnificent while still honoring its agricultural roots. The plan that had required 20 years of patient preparation was finally being executed with the precision that only comes from thorough planning and perfect timing. The story of the Harrison family became a legend in Millfield and beyond, told and retold as an example of how underestimation could become a powerful advantage in the hands of those who understood its strategic value. Sometimes the most effective strikes come from those who appear least likely to possess such power, delivered with precision that leaves observers wondering how they could have missed the signs of what was building beneath the surface all along. The old farmer had the last laugh, but it was a quiet satisfaction rather than triumph over those who had doubted him. Samuel Harrison had never been interested in proving his critics wrong, he had been focused on proving his strategy right. The difference between those two motivations, his sons learned, was the difference between temporary vindication and lasting success.